Hi, and welcome to the show. And I'm so excited to be having Andrea join us here today, all the way from Toronto. Andrea, I'm a long term fan of yours, and I'm so excited to have you on the show today.
Thank you so much, Victoria. I'm really looking forward to this conversation.
Me too, me too. And I want to dive straight into it. So, I'm really interested in this idea of impact. So, what do we even mean by impactful communication? I'd love to start there.
This is a great place to start. I was going to say this is a great question. One of my pet peeves is when people tell you every question that you ask is a great question. I'm not going to do that. I'm only going to say it when I mean it. Starting with impact, to me, is what this is all about. So, whether your listeners are looking for a promotion, whether they're looking to be recognized in meetings, whether they're looking to, close the sale, get the new job, whatever it is, that to me is impact. And in terms of a definition, the way that I like to think about impact is you're making someone or encouraging someone to either think about things or do things differently. So it could be as simple as raising your hand in a meeting and asking a question and having people stop and pause and think about that. Or it could be, like I said, closing the sale, getting the promotion, getting a new job. There are many ways that we make an impact. And recently, I've been thinking about this and how I have a framework with, I call it the leadership presence framework. At the apex of this framework, you're nodding your head, is impact. And then the question is, how do we build up to that? And so my framework has what I call foundational communication skills at the bottom. And by foundational, I certainly don't mean simple or easy or even basic, but these are the foundational communication skills that you need. And when you work on those communication skills, my clients tell me that what happens is their confidence is elevated. But there are also things that we can do to boost our confidence, as you know very well, Victoria. And when you do that, not only do you feel better, but people perceive the next step in the hierarchy, which is credibility. And interestingly, there are things that you can do to boost your credibility. Things like working on demonstrating leadership, things like developing your personal brand, things like working on influence and these kind of things. And then once you've done that, established credibility, that's when you can make an impact and communicate with impact. And it's not like you have to do one to get to the other, but if I had to guide someone without knowing anything about them, I would start with the communication skills, then go to confidence, then go to credibility, and then to impact.
That's really helpful. I love that really visual
Yeah.
description of that pyramid. I mean, that's easy for people also to sort of those just listening to really access that. And what do you find then? Where are most people sort of struggling? Is it at those communication foundations? Is that kind of generally where you see people are needing to really kind of dial in? Or do you find there are other layers that people kind of really struggle with?
So it certainly varies by person, as I'm sure you know. I would say generally, and of course there are many, many outliers, but generally, the more junior folks are more focused on what I call the foundational communication skills and the confidence, right? They come to me and they say, I'm suffering from imposter syndrome. I can barely get my hand up in a meeting to make a comment, right? And then the more senior people are looking to establish credibility and executive presence or leadership presence. So it's more higher up on the hierarchy. But I always tell people this, like, no matter what level you're at, going back to the foundational communication skills can also help bolster your confidence and your credibility, right? So, for example, the more senior people will come to me and say they're interested in things like communicating with precision and brevity. I find this really interesting, right? That the junior folks are challenged with speaking up. They'll say, like, I made a quota for myself. I need to speak up once in every meeting, right? And then the more senior folks are like, I need to speak with brevity and precision and clarity and actually speak less. So I find that very interesting.
That is really that
Yeah.
tension. Like you go from one part of your career to another, and then that challenge really changes.
Yeah.
But I heard you make that differentiation between executive presence and leadership presence. And I
Mm,
was hearing you talk about this recently. I found this really interesting because I sort of aligns also kind of how I see things. Could you just share a bit about your perspectives on this?
yeah. So I think we all have a feeling we know what executive presence is when we hear the term, but it is tough to define, certainly. And some people will come to me and they'll say, I'm seeking promotion. I'm very ambitious. I'm a vice president. I want to go senior vice president, or I'm a partner. I want to be promoted to senior partner. And they'll say, my mentor or my manager said I need to work on my executive presence. And we kind of know what that means, right? It's like demonstrating leadership and credibility. Um, I have also heard some people very explicitly talk about how they don't like the term executive presence. So I also coach a lot of physicians and healthcare leaders, and they will say to me, I'm not an executive. And also the same with lawyers, right? So people in other vocations outside of business will say, I'm not an executive. So can we call it something else? And I say, okay, let's call it leadership presence. I've also heard a lot of people, when they come to me, they'll say, my manager told me that I need to develop executive presence. And I feel like that is vague, coded language for something that I just don't have, and maybe I never will. So
Mm.
a lot of people associate executive presence with this sort of old school, patriarchal sort of dictator type of leadership style. I often think about the Jack Welch of the '90s, kind of strong male leader, and they'll whether they're male or female, they'll say that's not me. I'm demonstrating psychological safety, encouraging psychological safety in the organization, in the culture, in the teams that I'm leading. I want people to feel that we're open in terms of diversity of thought and the demographics of people in the organization. So for all of these kind of reasons, I feel like executive presence has a lot of baggage. And so I said, let's just call it leadership presence. And then most people just nod their head. They're like, yeah, let's just call it leadership presence.
Fantastic. I love that. And so for you, they really are the same thing. They are just essentially, it's a rebadging, a marketing, if you like, a
Yeah.
remarketing of the concept.
Yeah.
Yeah. And
So
I can, yeah.
I was just going to say, similarly, Victoria, and you may have heard me talk about this before. I feel like personal branding also has a bit of a branding problem. It has some baggage, right? And I think this is less and less common recently. I would say 5 years ago, if I said personal branding, people would go, what do you mean? I'm like, don't worry, I'm not trying to turn you into a social media influencer. This is about, and then I realized the synonym for personal branding, if people have an issue for that, in terms of what I mean, is professional identity. What is your professional identity? And then they go, oh, okay, yeah, that's important. But personal branding, I'm
Mm.
not sure I like that term. I will say, I don't know if you find the same thing. People don't seem to have as much of an issue with it nowadays.
Yeah, I think where it becomes an issue for people is where they feel like they have to sell themselves. So they're
Yeah.
kind of like, I don't really want to sell myself. I don't really want to. And I don't know whether that's cultural. We should definitely talk about cultural nuances
Mm-hmm.
here as well. But, I sometimes feel like people really don't like that sensation of, I don't want to be too arrogant. I don't want to be like bragging about all my achievements. So, I mean, what would you say to people who are saying this when it comes to like their personal branding, for example?
So I have a great little story about that really stopped me in my tracks. It was one of those moments where I said, great question, which like I said at the beginning, I try to save that. I was teaching a room of about 20 healthcare leaders. And I said, in our next session, we had a 10 workshop program. And I said, the next session we're doing next week is focused on personal branding. I've sent you some pre-work to do. And one of the physicians, everybody's, these are fantastic healthcare leaders. One of the gentlemen raised his hands and said, Andrea, I'm really curious what you're going to be teaching us here. As a healthcare leader, as a physician, I am not interested in standing out. I am interested in serving. So I don't really know why I would want to work on developing my personal brand. And that question, Victoria, just stopped me in my tracks. I was like, Ooh. And then I said, well, establishing your personal brand, again, think of it as establishing your professional identity and really establishing credibility. And I said, as a healthcare leader, you need to establish credibility, certainly with your patients, but also your colleagues, the administrators in the hospital or the healthcare clinic, whatever it is. And he said, okay. And I said, so are all physicians or healthcare leaders the same? No, they're not. And this is about helping you think about your unique strengths and maybe passions professionally and personally, and sharing them a way that will help you improve your credibility and your impact. Back to the impact question, right?
I love that story because again,
Mm-hmm.
you know, I can see in that context, in that industry, it's like, why would I even need a personal brand
Yeah.
here? But I think that that story really demonstrates that whether you choose to believe you have one or not, people experience you. Like they experience you all the time. That's part of your reputation, how you're
Yeah.
interacting with them, how you're showing up, how you're projecting yourself. So I think that's really interesting, right? Like even if we
Yeah.
choose not to believe in it, we're still projecting something out there.
Exactly. So about a couple days after I had this very public conversation, right? It was with the other folks that were in the room. Another physician actually emailed me and said, "I thought that conversation at the end of our class was really interesting. I wonder if that individual understands that even by asking that question, he was like updating his personal brand in everybody else's eyes, right? To your point, like we
Mm.
all have a brand, whether we choose to strategically develop and build it or not. The analogy that I share, and this is something that I'm bringing up in one of the first chapters of a book that I'm writing on personal branding, is that similar to your credit rating, we all have a credit rating, we all have a personal brand. You can ignore your credit rating, just like you can ignore your personal brand, but you still have one. And you can do things to improve your credit rating, just like you can do things to improve your personal brand. So I think that's kind of a nice analogy for people to think about. You can choose to ignore it if you want, it's still there.
Fantastic. I love that comparison. I love that analogy. And for myself, I know I'm very excited about this book when it eventually comes. But yeah, I mean, that idea is really great. So, how do we build up? We know there are things we can do to build up our credit rating. Just what are some maybe simple first steps people can do to start working on that personal brand? And now, let's say somebody is a bit like, okay, I need to do something about this. Where do they start?
So I know a lot of folks, when they start to think about their personal brand and what they want to think about themselves and also what they want to communicate or reinforce with others, they'll immediately go to like best in class. Who do I want to look like? Who do I want to sound like? What do I want to look like? What do I want to sound like? And instead, I suggest that you look inside and ask yourself what your unique strengths, passions, and skills are. So it could be credentials, it could be industry expertise, it could be functional expertise, it could be geography, it could, to the point of this whole podcast, right? In terms of culture, it could be that you are truly a global leader. You have lived and worked in 3 continents. I have lots of clients, for example, that have an accent, and they'll say, I had this question once in a Q&A. She said, as you can tell by my accent, I am an immigrant. I want to change my brand from immigrant to corporate lawyer. How do I do that? And I was like, whoa, whoa, whoa. So tell me where you've lived and worked. And she said, I've lived and worked in India, I've lived and worked in the UK, and now I'm in Manhattan. And I said, so your accent is evidence of your global experience. It's actually an asset, not a liability. So this is back to the point of what is unique about you. I said, you could even say, as you can hear clearly from my accent, I'm not from around here. I did pass the bar in the state of New York, and I'm a corporate lawyer here, but I have global experience having lived and worked in 3 continents. It's like, boom, drop the mic. That is her unique brand. And she was so delighted with this. She's like, thankfully, I raised my hand and asked this question, Andrea. It was a really powerful moment. But, and this may be an extreme example, but I encourage people to think about what are the unique things about you, maybe even things that you're trying to hide, that you can create a narrative around. Of course, a true an authentic narrative, but really focus on the things that make you unique. So one of the lines that I use in the book is unique is better than better. So instead of being sucked into focusing on what you want to sound like, who you want to emulate, look inside at your unique strengths. So that's one thing I would say. And the second thing is really focusing on yourself, your self-introduction. Your self-introduction is the most direct way that you have to reinforce your brand because it's your words from you about you.
Fabulous. And I love that story because it's a really powerful moment. And I genuinely think it's a very common misconception that the way you sound, the accent is something to suppress or to hide or to minimize. But actually, I love the way you express that as that's a point of difference. That's something that is unique to you. And you bring something truly global through that. So I think that's a really amazing nugget for our listeners here today. I think that is really very encouraging. And you talked about the introductions. I know you have an amazing framework for this, and I'd love for you to share that if that's okay, because I know it's something that is very simple, but amazingly, but not simple in some ways. Like there's a lot of depth to that, and it really works. Would you mind sharing it? Because I know you're incredibly famous for this introduction kind of approach.
Yeah. Oh, thank you for saying that. It's simple, but it's not so simple. It actually really is simple. I tell people, you don't need to write this down. Once you hear it, you'll have it forever. So based on the many, many questions that I had from my coaching clients to help them with their self-introduction, I'm really not a fan of a memorized elevator pitch or elevator speech, whatever you want to call it, right? Where you kind of memorize who you are and what you do and what you're all about and what your goals are. Instead of memorizing something is never ideal because first of all, it sounds memorized or rehearsed because it is. And secondly, it's not customized for your audience. So instead, I developed this 3-step framework and I sent it into Harvard Business Review and they changed the title of it to a simple framework to introduce yourself. To your point, Victoria, it's just 3 things. It's present, past, future, as in step 1 is present tense. Hi, my name is Dr. Andrea Wojnicki. I'm an executive communication coach at Talk About Talk. So you can just say your name, your title, and your company. And if you're not currently employed, you're maybe in transition, you could say, my expertise is. Okay, so that's present tense. That's all you need to say. Step 2 is past tense. And this is where you establish credibility. So this is where you could say something like, I've lived and worked in 3 countries. I earned my whatever it is degree at the University of whatever, where my research focused on, fill in the blanks. My previous job was, right? So you get the idea. Depending on the context, again, this is not memorized. You're pulling themes from the work you've done, hopefully on your personal brand. You're pulling the themes that will help you establish credibility so that, back to what you said at the beginning, you can make an impact with the audience that you're with. So depending on the context, you might share 1 or 2 or 3 things about yourself in the past tense. And this is where most people end their self-introduction. They're like, and that's me. And it kind of, if you're the next person, you're like, are you done? Yep. Okay. Right. We've all been there. So instead of kind of fading off like that, step 3 is really, really easy and really important. So step 3 is future tense. This is where you say something with enthusiasm about the future and ideally about the immediate future with the person that you're introducing yourself to. So if I was introducing myself to you, Victoria, I might say something like, I'm really looking forward to this conversation and getting to know you better. That's it. It's like 1 or 2 sentences about what's to come. If you are in a job interview, you could say, I'm really looking forward to learning more about this role and the organization because I think I might be a great fit. If you are kicking off a new project team at work and you're going around the table introducing yourselves, you could say, I'm really looking forward to working with all of you over the next couple of months, and I know we're going to knock this out of the park. So you just say something with enthusiasm about the future, and there's all sorts of research that shows when you demonstrate enthusiasm, good things happen.
I love that. It's so fantastic. And I love that. For me, this is something that's so memorable. So present, past, future. And you mentioned some great examples there. And I had a follow-up question to that because you mentioned people who are sort of going through crossroads, like going through those moments. And look, I'm working with lots of people right now. I'm sure you are as well, seeing lots of people who are facing restructures, reorgs, maybe lost their jobs, maybe kind of trying to find new jobs. So I can imagine that they can come up with some statement for the now. This is what I'm doing, what I did. But what do they say? Like, let's say, imagine this is like a more of a networking situation. What do they say about the future? Because I think sometimes people get a bit stuck about, I still want to sound enthusiastic, but I know I'm job searching right now. So what would you suggest for this?
So you could make the future there in my mind now that, and this doesn't show up in, there's a Harvard Business Review article where this 3-point framework really took off. It was one of the most downloaded articles in 2023 at hbr.org. But what I was going to say is this point does not come up in that article. So this is just a little insight for your listeners. Step 3, the future statement with enthusiasm, could be about the person that you're talking to right now. Like, I'm really looking forward to getting to know you better. I'm really looking forward to this conversation. If you're at a networking event, you could say, I'm really looking forward to meeting you and other people and hearing the keynote speaker later. Whatever. So you could make it about the immediate interaction. If you're on the job market, I would say you want people to know that you're on the job market. So that when they hear about an opening, they'll think of you. So this is where you could reinforce your expertise again and share that you are on the job market. And you could say, I'm currently on the job market. I'm really looking forward to my next role where I really hope to leverage my expertise in whatever the industry is. And I'm looking in this area. So the more information, frankly, that you give them about what you're looking for, the more it's going to help you. Don't hide it. Yeah.
I love that. And I think that's really great, right? Again, it doesn't have to be complex or even something you're not sure you want to commit to, but just about the current context, the current moment, the person who's in front of you. Yep. Thank you for that tip. I think that's going to be very helpful for people listening. And I was thinking about something we touched on earlier. We talked about this kind of difference between executive presence and leadership presence, and something that's evolving, like how people think about also personal branding. What else do you see that's evolving in communication, in executive communication, that things that people are changing their mind on or thinking differently about, or how they're talking about things?
That's a great question. I think a couple things. So one is the increasing significance of brevity and clarity. Based on how we've all got our phones and we're flipping through, like, whatever the video platform is that you're on, the videos are getting shorter and shorter. People are skimming. I've heard this, that people don't, if you send an email and one of the paragraphs goes more than 3 lines, people will not read it, right? So the increasing importance of clarity, and specifically, I say precision is a combination of clarity and brevity. And I would say both are becoming more and more important as we're being overwhelmed with multiple media and demands, and our brains are getting wired to expect more brief and clear communication. So that's one thing I would say. And then, do you find the same, by the way? Have you?
But I'm sort of it's really interesting. There's a couple of thoughts that are going off in my head around that, because I also know culturally for some parts of the globe that actually the natural style is much more verbose or much more like detailed and needing to give lots of context. But I definitely think that's true. What I see is in written communication, like you'll be lucky if people open an email these days, right? Like, they're pinging each other a message on Teams or whatever the platform is. And, I think almost it's becoming like certain written formats are becoming obsolete, or as you say, people will open it, but they're like, oh, that's too much information. So I think that's really interesting. I can see that definitely in the written form.
Yeah. So there's one line that I've shared a couple times that I think helps people. Especially if it's a global audience or an international context where some people are expecting and preferring brevity and others are looking for detail, and it's almost like you can't win. So I always say, aim for brevity, but do not be elusive. So there's this line which is, happy to elaborate. Just 3 words. Happy to elaborate. And then you pause so that people can say, yeah, tell us more. Or they'll be like, oh, okay, that's good. Right. So saying, if you're, going into a job interview and you're not sure whether they're looking for you to talk for a long time or to be brief and precise, and they say, Victoria, why don't you tell us about yourself? And you're like, am I supposed to speak for 10 seconds, 30 seconds, 3 minutes, 10 minutes? Like, you have no idea, right? So I say, do the present tense, do the past tense, share 3 things that you want them to know. And then at the end, tell them why you think you're a great fit for the job and you're excited to learn more. And then you say, I'm happy to elaborate on any of the things that I mentioned here, but I'm happy to also get into the interview. So happy to elaborate is this line that I love.
That is fabulous. And you also mentioned something else I absolutely love as well, which is the beautiful power of 3. Do you want to share a bit more? Because I know you're also a huge fan of this idea of 3.
Yeah, this is going to show up a lot in my book. It's become, I said to the editor, I want it to be kind of like a joke that I have with the reader, where it's like, guess how many? There's 3 reasons, or guess how many things you're supposed to say? Guess how many points in the self-introduction framework? It's always 3. And if it's not 3, it's like, I'm sorry, I tried for 3, right? So there is real power in 3s. 3s are balanced. Like, think of a tripod or a triangle. It's like a balanced number. It is convincing. So 2 things is interesting, right? 3 is almost a trend. And yet it's not overwhelming. We can all remember 3 things, hopefully without taking notes. So I always say, if you're wondering how many chapters to put in your book, I have 3 parts, each with 3 chapters. Not an accident, right? The 3-point self-introduction framework. If your boss is asking you for a recommendation, and implicit or implied in that is, and your rationale, you would say, here's my recommendation. There are many reasons. Let me share 3 with you. 1, 2, 3. It's convincing without being overwhelming. So I'm a huge fan of the power of 3. And I heard recently, Victoria, that, there are these things that generative AI are becoming known for, in terms of, like, for a while it was the rocket ship emoji, and then it was the M dash. And I heard recently it's all about the power of 3. And so typically I try to avoid whatever AI trends there are out there. But I said to myself and my team, we are not straying away from the power of 3. It's actually I would say it's part of my brand, right? And I'm also encouraging it because I think it clarifies communication.
Absolutely. And coming back to our original topic of today, impact. 3 is impactful, as you say, memorable, people remember, whatever those 3 points are, particularly if we keep it short and simple, 1 word for each of those points. Yeah. Andrea, I could literally talk to you for hours. I've really, really enjoyed this conversation.
Me too.
If there was like one thing you wanted people to kind of really remember from today, from everything that we've talked about, like, what do you think is the most important thing that comes to top of mind for you?
I would say that it is actually ironic how we spend so much of our time and energy and our life in our own heads thinking about ourselves. We have to survive, never mind thrive, right? And yet very few of us take the time to think about our unique identity in a disciplined and strategic way. And a little bit of effort will go a long way. And so the one thing is to start to take some time, especially if you're middle manager and above, mid-career and above, start to think about your unique strengths and focus on that more, as opposed to just trying to be better. I say again, unique is better than better. That would be the one thing that I would say can get people a lot of traction in terms of their confidence and their credibility and their impact.
Amazing. I'm sure people will be taking that away and really thinking about that. What's coming up next for you?
Well, I am working really hard on writing my book. The working title is Let Me Introduce Myself. So it's taking up all the cliches that you hear about writing a book, as Victoria and I were speaking before, are all so true. It is very satisfying work, but it's hard work. So I'm spending every waking hour almost that I have thinking about it and writing.
Well, I know for one that I'm very excited to see this book come to life. How can people connect with you, follow you, find out more about your work, Andrea?
So if you go to talkabouttalk.com, that's my website. You'll see everything. I've got a newsletter with free communication skills coaching coming out every 2 weeks. And I also spend a lot of time on LinkedIn. It's Andrea Wojnicki on LinkedIn. So one of those two places. Yeah.
Amazing. Well, we'll put all the kind of links in the show notes. But Andrea, thank you so much for joining us here today. It's been such a pleasure to have you on the show. And I've really, for one, really enjoyed this conversation, as I'm sure our listeners have.
Thank you so much, Victoria. It was really a pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you.